It is likely that you or someone you care for will experience depression at some point in your lifetime. That's because an estimate 300 million people are affected by the disorder worldwide.
Well, our next guest is an educator, a policy advocate, and physician who wrote a book on how to make sense of all of it, and it is called This is Depression. Please welcome psychiatrist Dr. Diane McIntosh. Welcome.
Dr. McIntosh, welcome to the show, and I really appreciate the title of your book, This is Depression, because in order to understand something, we have to name it and really define it. So what is depression?
That seems like a simple question, but it really isn't. In order to have a diagnosis of depression, you need to have one of two symptoms, either a depressed mood or what's called anhedonia, which is a loss of pleasure or interest in things you normally enjoy. That surprises people because they think you can be depressed without having a depressed mood. But in fact, anhedonia, or not being interested in things you would normally enjoy, is actually a very powerful predictor of depression.
Okay, I think everyone can relate to periods of time where we felt depressed, and it may have even impacted our day-to-day activity. So how do we differentiate that kind of everyday or kind of depression from actual depression?
So a bad day, and how does that differ from depression?
That's right.
And that has to do with, first of all, the severity of symptoms, the number of symptoms you have, because it's not just feeling depressed or not interested, but also changes in your sleep, changes in your appetite. Your brain isn't working for you. You have no energy. Your get up and go is got up and left. So the symptoms, and what's important to every psychiatric illness is the presence of functional impairment, which means that you're not able to do the things you normally can do. You're not working as effectively as normal. You're not parenting as well as you normally would, or your relationships are suffering.
Wow. I think a lot of people will look at mental illness as a whole and say, oh, it's nature versus nurture, maybe a combination thereof. And you say it's more effective to look at it as a combination or an interaction of biological, psychological, and social factors. So how do those three things intersect?
So when you look at mental illnesses, you can never say it's caused by this. There's never one cause, and I think as parents we always worry, have we caused this? It's never one cause. There are biological risk factors. Those are things like hormones, your genetics, your brain chemicals like serotonin, norepinephrine. Then there's the psychological factors, your temperament. And if you've had a child, and two children, you know they pop out of the womb completely different. So we all have different temperaments, but we also, some of us are more resilient or more vulnerable. Some of us have better coping strategies. And then we have the social factors. Maybe you're under a lot of financial strain. Perhaps there's issues at work or problems, concerns with your children, or you have a physical health problem, and there's an interaction of those three that produces any mental illness.
So when it comes to children, taking the biological aspect of it out, there's other things that we can do to protect them. How can we protect our kids from getting into this?
From developing a mental illness?
Yeah.
So I think, first of all, we need to teach kids about mental illness. I think in Ontario, they had a whole election about giving a sexual vocabulary and education in schools around sexuality. I think we need that same kind of education around mental illness, starting very young. The other important factor is we know that if you experience not just abuse, physical, sexual, or emotional abuse, but chaos, neglect, that has a powerful impact on your risk of developing not only mental illness, but also physical illness. So parents need to, first of all, love their children, but also create a stable, warm environment where you're open to hearing, having conversations, hearing what they have to say, and also asking questions. I don't ask my kids, how was your day? Because the answer is, fine. Right? I ask, what happened today? Tell me about your day, because that pulls out those questions you want to hear. And we know that increases in anxiety and completed suicide are really a massive health problem in Canada and the US.
It's interesting, and maybe not a surprise for some people, that some mental disorders like depression can have a very serious impact on your physical health as well. How so?
Many people are not aware of the fact that depression, when it becomes chronic, if it's very severe, is actually an inflammatory illness. So when you've had depression that's long-standing, very severe, you set up an inflammatory problem inside your body. That puts you at risk for developing other physical health problems, diabetes, obesity, heart disease, other inflammatory illnesses. And the reverse is also true, that if you have heart disease, obesity, diabetes, that increases your risk for developing depression and anxiety. And you don't need to tell people that your mind and your body are connected. We've all been really anxious and had a very private emergency as a result. Our body, our guts, our brain all react to what's going on with our emotions.
It sounds like then that, you know, individual physicians should be in conversation then with mental health care workers. Is that actually what's happening, or is there a gap in the medical system?
I heard your previous guest talk about stigma, and I think it's an important opportunity. We know stigma exists in society in general, and we tend to think about some groups as being even more stigmatizing. What we don't talk about is that stigma lives in medicine, that it exists even in my profession, with my colleagues, with those that perhaps deal with the physical health problems. Family practitioners do most of the psychiatry in this country. Psychiatrists like me, we only get a small percentage of that, but that's my whole practice. But we all health care providers need to understand the medical impact of psychiatric illnesses.
So there was a study that came out of the University of Toronto last week, and it found that older refugees are more likely to have depression. So this addresses that other circle in your Venn diagram. We've covered biological, we've covered psychological, this is social. What is the relationship between depression and oppressed populations? So people who are dealing with racism, inequality, injustice, economic disparity.
We know that if you are in a group that perhaps ethnically or as sexual minority, that you are at higher risk, probably related to facing discrimination, perhaps being victimized, that not being able to be yourself, not being able to feel safe, maybe even the environment where people who are meant to be protecting you, the police, legislators, physicians, are not really offering a protective environment, that leads you to not be yourself, feel lonely and isolated, and that makes you at risk for developing depression, anxiety, other mental illnesses.
So if people are watching right now who either feel like they're suffering through something or have people, friends, family, people in their community going through things, what should they know and what steps should they take to maybe even reach out to somebody when they're suffering or have people suffering?
I think the most important thing is showing compassion. I think your previous guest said, don't tell me what I need. I think what you do is you offer. You say, I'm sorry you're experiencing this. I understand this is very difficult. You may even want to share your own experience, and then say, what can I do to help? That could be as simple as, I'll take care of your kids when you go to an appointment, or I'll offer you a drive, whatever support you need. And sometimes it's just being a friend and not talking about depression.
Dr. McIntosh, thanks for your research, your work in contributing to this conversation. I know it's helping a lot of people. We really appreciate that you're here today. The book is called This is Depression, and there's also a list of helpful resources at bell.ca/Let's Talk. Remember, make a call, send a text, or use a hashtag BellLet'sTalk to keep this really important discussion going, and we will be right back.